Let me know when
Okay, let me introduce you.
you're
It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and Beyond Plastics Communications Director, Melissa Valient.
Hi, you all. Really nice to see all of your faces. Thanks for joining the call this evening and listening to me drone on about media. You all have a very big opportunity to leverage your voice as citizens, and you have more power than a lot of people realize too in using that voice and using media to affect change. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I am going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Everybody see it? Good. Okay. Just a little more about me. I am the communications director at Beyond Plastics. I've been here since February of 2022, which is crazy. So I manage the PR, the media, messaging, communications, as well as a bunch of other bits and pieces, anything involving words, essentially, that comes out of Beyond Plastics. And today I am going to help you all learn how to find local media contacts and build a media list. We're going to talk about media advisories and news releases as well. And we're going to talk about tips for pitching media as well as LTEs and op-eds, which I know of you all, some of you at least have a little bit of training on, but we can talk a little more in depth about strategy there. Sound good? And feel free, if you have questions throughout any of this, if you just want to raise your hand, and when I get to a point where I can take a pause and take questions, I can call on you then. So starting with how to build a media list. Local NPR stations are a great place to start. Everywhere pretty much has their own local NPR station. I encourage you all to research online to see what yours is if you don't already know, and what their tips line is or tips email. A simple Google search too of newspapers in your city or state or media outlets will give you a list. I also tend to look for highest, like a list of by circulation, so that you can know exactly what has the highest reach. And in terms of reporters, you're going to look for, if you're going to be pitching something outside of op-eds and LTEs, you're going to be looking for environmental reporters. These can often be listed as climate reporters. Climate reporters intersect with plastics because, as I'm sure a lot of you know, plastics and climate intersect a lot. So climate and environmental reporters are a good place to start. There's also health, depending on what your story is, or local and regional news. So if there is a proposed polluting facility, for example, I think any of those could be a good place to hit. Let's see. For building a media list, you want to be asking yourself the following questions. Would an outlet that you're looking at cover the story that you want to tell? Does it typically cover local environmental or public health issues? Is it unbiased? As an example, New York Post is not an outlet that we usually go to. You want to avoid the sensational and go just for the medium of the road, middle of the road outlets. So just think about what would be the most appropriate place for whatever story you're trying to pitch. And I've included an example, a screenshot of what a media list looks like. This was taken from my national media list from a while back. You can just use a simple spreadsheet. So have your outlet, can ignore status. That was from when I was pitching something, but it helps too to have a column for notes as you're trying to pitch stories. First name and last name of reporters, their titles too, so that you can, even when you send your pitch, cater it to whatever their specialty is. Their email address, of course, and then again, I just have a notes section for any other details that might be helpful about that particular contact for when I'm writing to them. Cultivating media
Melissa,
relationship.
it's kind of hard to see that table. Could you just tell us what the headers were on the table?
Sure. Yeah, so it's outlet for the first column. Then I would do first name for the next, last name, the title, so, climate reporter, environmental reporter, email address, and then any notes for the last column. Investigative journalist too, if it's a bigger outlet, might also be a good contact for you depending on what story you're trying to tell. So for media relationships, you're going to want to introduce yourself, preferably via email. A great way to do this is to just compliment them on a story. Let them know that you've read their work, that you really appreciate their coverage, and then just make yourself visible without being a nuisance. So you can send an email with some relevant information after that a few days later, based on whatever you want them to start paying attention to or digging into. If you are on Twitter, or as it's known now, X, you can follow those reporters, tag them in post, or retweet their post just so that they are seeing your name and seeing your presence, so that you are top of mind for them. Again, without being a nuisance, but you are still going to be top of mind. So media advisories and news releases. For a media advisory, you're going to have something like this, or a news advisory, you can call it either one. It's if you have an upcoming event that you want people to attend. So where I see you all needing something like this is for film screenings, which I know you all host occasionally, or if there's a local rally that you're organizing or your group is organizing, webinars, etc. And I've included an example here. I'm hoping you all can see it. I'm going to send you all this presentation, by the way, afterward, so you have it, as well as some templates for news advisories and news releases. But this is an example of a film screening media advisory. So this is when you want reporters or the public or both to know that you have an event coming up, and here's why they should care. And here are the deets, the what, the when, who, where, and why. The 5 W's, as I was taught in journalism school. So news release purposes, alternatively, is when you want people to know about something important that has already happened, or you want to put pressure on a particular decision maker and have a timely hook. This, just as an example, it's if your town or county passed an ordinance banning single-use plastic, you can put out a news release that applauds that praises that. If there is a polluting facility that's been proposed in your area and you want to get reporters to start paying attention to this and the opposition to it, that's an opportunity for a news release. Maybe there's a neighboring state or county or city that passed an ordinance that you would also love to have passed in your state or county or city. You could even put out a news release trying to put pressure on policymakers in your area to do the same thing. So I chatted with Christina too today just to go over process for this, but if you have a news release that you'd like to publish that we can help with, email Christina and me with the idea. I've included our emails here. And if we're good to have Beyond Plastic's name on it, you can use our template to create your own news release. And again, I'm going to share that with you after this. You'll have all the links to all the things so that this can be as easy as possible for you. And Christina and I can review and offer tips. I have a wonderful database of media contacts that we get through Bennington College. And so occasionally, if you need media contacts in a certain area, if you get to me early enough, I might be able, depending on what my workload is, to try to find some media contacts and their email addresses for you. So don't hesitate to ask, it can't hurt. This is a news release pitch example, and I'll go through pitching and what submissions to reporters and outlets looks like later. But basically, you just want to keep the message really short and have your news release copied and pasted into the body of the email so that they don't have to read much to get to the good stuff. and there aren't attachments. No attachments. We don't like attachments. It's just an extra step for a reporter to have to double click an attachment and view that. You want to make sure, do everything that you can in your power to make sure that your topic, that your story gets seen. And this is a news release template that I'm going to share with you all. This is just a hypothetical. It actually happened several years ago when I was working at Oceana, but Laguna Beach had passed an ordinance that reduced single-use plastic foodware there. This was in Florida. So you basically have your contact, your release date, your headline, and a quick paragraph, even just 2 sentences, maybe 3, about what just happened. Include a quote from, you can do a quote from a resident or from one of the policymakers, even if you reach out early enough, that made it happen. And then we've got a bunch of background on plastics and the issues associated with it that we can flow into that, just so that reporters have background when they hear this news and they understand why it's important. And once approved through us, you can send that media advisory or news release to your contact list. And again, depending on when you catch me, I might be able to help you with some contacts as well. When you send that out, you're going to want to either send individually to each reporter, or if your list is bigger, you can do a blind copy of all of those emails. So if you have 30 reporters that you want to reach out to, you can copy and paste their email addresses into the BCC and send out a mass email. Individually is always best, though, if you're able to do it. The more personalized, the better. So it's really important when you are pitching reporters, whether you're pitching a story idea for a reporter to cover, or you're pitching an LTE or an op-ed, excuse me, that you've already written. It's important to think like a reporter. What's important to them. So for one, they're very worried about not just getting the story out quickly, but also getting it right. Accuracy is so important. They also fear appearing biased. They're typically underpaid and are required to produce stories in short time frames. So time is very valuable to them. So basically what you can do to help your pitch get seen and potentially accepted is to be quick, simple, to the point, but compelling, and make sure that you're supporting your pitch with facts that are linked to real sources, because they're not just going to take everything you say as truth. They want to make sure that this is all factually based. So hyperlinks are great. So the 3 T's for pitching are tone, time, and technicality. Tone, just remember, it's not just about what you say, it's how you say it. You want to sound authoritative, but not detached. Be human. It's a human to human communication. Time, you're going to want to be quick. Like I said, time is very valuable to reporters. So hook them in the first 2 lines. They're going to be getting so many emails a day, and you want to make sure you're getting their attention right away. And technicality, it means you want to avoid jargon or highly scientific or specialized language, like I keep saying LTE instead of letter to the editor. Avoid acronyms. Speak as if you expect them to not know whatever the story is that you are pitching, or the even the area. So a great way to do this is what we call headlining. You want to open with your most compelling data or fact, and then provide some supporting arguments. And these are just some examples. I think a lot of people can be shocked, for example, that less than 6% of plastic is recycled in the US. So it's a great one to lead with if you're going with something around plastics recycling. A soundbite is a word that I use a lot in my job. It means something that's very catchy, short, informative, and compelling. These are just some examples of sound bites. Sound bites are your friend. Use those in pitches, in talking to reporters, if you're interviewing with reporters, especially. Those are super important to keep in mind. Some more examples. Again, you'll have all of these. This is an example of a reporter pitch. I was unrealistically ambitious and I believe was trying to get onto a late night show. But go big or go home, right? So you're going to want to send, and this is actually a little on the longer side, but it required a little bit of introducing the issue. It was around our New York bill that we were trying to pass, a New York State bill, and we were getting a lot of pushback from the industry. So it just gives you an idea of how these can be structured. Always be extra polite, recognize that they don't have a lot of time.
Melissa,
Uh,
I'm sorry, Melissa, can you make
yeah,
this full screen so it's easier to read?
sure. Let's see, play from current slide. Is that better?
That's better. Yep, thanks.
Um, And then I think a bulleted list of resources that are hyperlinked is a very quick and easy way to get to the point. And again, because they're concerned with accuracy, right? They want to know that all of this is coming from a place of fact and science. So have the links to whatever content you are trying to push.
Explain what Cheesegate is before you move on, the context of this pitch.
So we were trying to pass a New York State bill at the time that we'll be back to trying to pass in 2025, but it would have, among many things, banned certain single-use plastic items in New York State. Industry, in an attempt to alarm the public, was saying that people would no longer be able to get their wonderful Kraft cheese singles. And so we were responding to this. And in this pitch, I was trying to pitch for a segment in a late night show that focuses on just some of the most ridiculous of the ridiculous pieces of news that week. So that was Cheesegate. If you ever encounter any of this, we have an entire fact sheet on single-use slices of cheese. Or, individually packaged slices of cheese. Odd that this is not. Okay, got it. So, I'm going to jump into some LTE and op-ed stuff, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows the terminology. An op-ed and an LTE, or letter to the editor, these are both pieces of commentary that are published in the opinion section of a newspaper, but an op-ed is on the longer side. It's typically between 600 and 900 words. And a letter to the editor is pretty short and to the point, typically between 150 and 300 words, though every outlet I've ever pitched to has a page that'll tell you what their word count is. And you'll always want to look at that first so that you make sure that your submission is within that word count. But these are both written by readers. And an editorial, just not that we're going into editorials, but so that you know the difference, is written by a newspaper or media outlet's editorial board versus letter to the editor and op-ed, which are written by readers. So I wanted to go a little bit in a strategy of this. Again, I know some of you have experience with LTEs and op-eds, but I have some helpful examples too of where we've used strategy to get placed. And I think it can be fun even for you all to think in this way and get creative with your own local and regional outlets. So for, and I'm going to have to pull up my notes. Give me 1 second. I was trying to do notes on the side, but now that we're doing full screen, I am glad I texted them to myself. For LTE strategy, when a major national paper publishes something relevant related to whatever topic or story you were trying to push, read the article and ask yourself the following questions. Are there points in that article that you could effectively rebuke? Is it something you can applaud? Does the article fail to go the extra mile in conveying real solutions? If If so, to any of these, you can use that article that was published in your local paper or your regional paper or even your national paper. Again, go big or go home, whatever you all want to do on the plastic space. You can use that article as a jumping off point for an LTE. For local and regional papers in the US, you don't necessarily need a recently published article to center your LTE around. You can pretty much pitch an LTE to any local paper about anything, even if they have not covered it before. But you will still need to pay attention to timeliness. So why does that story that you want to pitch matter now? Is your town considering an environmental policy that you want to advocate, for example? Or again, maybe there's a proposed polluting facility in your area that you want to speak up against. In terms of timing, urgency is key. If you're responding to an article that has been published, you want to do it quickly. I would say ideally submit your LTE within 3 days of the article being published, but no more than a week. This is actually my first ever letter to the editor published around plastics. And I think my husband's mouse just connected with my computer screen, so I apologize. There was a story published in the New York Times at the time, just as an example, that was called Life Without Plastics is Possible. It's just very hard. And it had chronicled 4 lovely individuals nationally who had tried to live without plastic, and they found it nearly impossible. I mean, they were making their own toothpaste, their own lip balm. The normal person, the average person, does not have the time or resources to do these things. And so I saw that as an opportunity to write an LTE in response that just said, like, this is impossible. Companies have made it impossible. And this is why we need policies, right? Like, this is why policies are so important, so that policymakers can require companies to reduce their use of plastic and provide consumers with plastic-free options, because that's what they want. We just don't even have that available. Can you all see the squiggles on my screen too, or is that just on my end? Is there like a blue line through the screen? Alexis?
Yes, there is.
Man, okay.
We'll ignore it.
Okay. So for op-eds, again, remember these are the longer ones. You don't need to be responding to a recently published article. You can, but you don't have to. And timing kind of depends on what's going on in the news and what's going on around you. So what are people already talking about that you can connect your story to? Maybe there's a bill that was just introduced. Maybe there was polling done around plastic pollution on the national, local, or state level, and you can use that as a timely hook. Maybe there's a new scientific study that just came out. Sadly, it feels like there's a new one every month or two now on plastics in the body. You can use that as a starting place of, like, this is why it's important now, before pivoting into your real story. This was an example of how we did this. So for you all on the East Coast, I don't know if you remember last year in July, all the smoke where it became literally unhealthy to step outside and breathe the air. And that was coming from wildfires that were caused by climate change. This was a great time because everybody was talking about the smoke. We could use it as a jumping off point to then jump into the climate and plastics connection and ask for what we wanted to ask for. So bad timing. Holidays and observances, a lot of people automatically think, oh, it's Earth Day, so that feels like a perfect time to pitch something. I actually don't recommend holidays and observances too often. Environmental reporter Rebecca Lieber at Mother Jones did a great story a while back called "I'm an Environmental Journalist and I Hate Earth Day." They get hit with so many press releases and story pitches that day that it's impossible for them to sift through them all. So the way I see it is most of the time with these holidays and observances, why compete with the rest of the world on an unrealistic level when you can try to push that story at a different time with less competition? Or if there's big irrelevant news happening right now, as an example, I don't know if you all are aware, but there was a presidential election in the United States that happened in November. There was a good 2-week slot there where we couldn't do much with media because nobody was going to be paying attention to the plastic pollution issue. And that was just the reality of it. So always be aware of timing. So choosing your target and call to action, if you're doing an LTE or an op-ed, for target, think whose mind are you trying to change? And call to action is what do you want your target to do about it? So maybe it's your city council that is debating an ordinance. That would be your target. And it's good to call them out. Be direct. So for choosing an outlet, we kind of already jumped into this. I'm going to skip through. Make sure you do your homework when you are submitting an LT or an op-ed. Again, go to that page on that outlet's website, figure out the recommended word count. They also usually have some requirements for a submission, sometimes even as specific as your home address, which I've freaked out some of my colleagues by including that in the draft. And they're like, is that going to be published? Like, no, it's not going to be published, but sometimes outlets need that information just to confirm that this is coming from the person it says it's coming from. And sometimes those outlets can also provide guidelines on what they're looking for in terms of tone and what they cover. Super important to appeal to your audience. So what does this audience care about? Find a unique angle that you wouldn't find in other coverage. That I've got to say it, but if you all have seen The Graduate and they have that famous line about one word, plastics, don't use it in any of your submissions, please. I've seen it in so many plastics pieces now. So find a unique angle, find something fresh and different. And for local and regional outlets, use local and regional stats. You want to convince this audience that this affects them. This is relevant to them and they should care. This is an example. This is an op-ed that was written for a North Carolina outlet when I was working at Oceana. It was written by a colleague of mine at that point. It called out the state of North Carolina for not yet passing single-use plastic bans that so many other states had, despite being a state that very much values its coast. It used North Carolina specific data, as you can see. It even cited a report about marine life that were directly impacted by plastic within North Carolina waters. It appealed to those who may be more economically focused than environmentally focused, which is something I personally can never understand, but there are a lot of people like that out there. So appeal to them, talk about why those who don't even care about the environment should care about this issue, because it also affects local and regional economies on top of human health and climate. Best practices for writing. So, and all of this kind of applies to any pitches that you're going to be writing, whether it's a letter to the editor, an op-ed, or you're trying to just convince a reporter to cover a piece. But you're going to want to get the reader's attention in the first 3 sentences. Don't be wordy referencing an article in your LTE. If you're referencing an article, you don't want to use up all the real estate, that limited word count that you have. Just mention it very briefly. Introduce your call to action. What are you asking for? Say it early. You want to get that out in the very beginning and then also in your conclusion to really hammer it home. You can use analogies strategically to really help explain some of the more complicated things. I know we've used that for recycling before, to explain why focusing on plastics recycling alone is not going to fix the problem. Remember your word count and always include a short bio, which is really just one sentence, of, you know, you're a local resident of the area, and that's, you know, why is this coming from you and why should people care? This is an example of using an anecdote. If you all can read the first paragraph of this op-ed from our president, Judith Enck. She is talking about, well, the whole op-ed was about compostable plastic and why it isn't as sustainable as a lot of people think. And she kind of painted a picture here of getting takeout from a restaurant and saying, no utensils, please. And the restaurant staff said, oh, but they're compostable. And her expressing that, oh, that's not a solution, but it gets you hooked in the very beginning. And it's also a very relatable experience that anybody can have of getting takeout from a restaurant. So again, make this relatable and applicable to the audience that you're catering to. So submitting your op-ed for best practices, I talked briefly just with pitches too, about how hyperlinks are your friend. Don't ever forget those hyperlinks. Hyperlink to reliable sources for anything, your pitches, your letters to the editor, op-eds. And I always do one submission with 2 email recipients, the generic letters/opinion email address that you can find on any of these outlets' website, but also do a little bit of hunting online and see if you can find the opinion editor's contact information, because putting them into that same email and having it sent directly to them is more likely to get their attention. You can also even address them in that email by name. You're just going to have a brief email intro, and I'll show you an example in a second, but with your who, what, and why. And a trick I use that you all can use with any pitch in email form is to end your pitch with a question. Your last line is a question. Is this of interest? Question mark. Because as humans, we are more likely to respond to an email if it ended with a question, because it feels impolite to not respond with an answer. So take advantage of that, do that. And again, do not attach ever. If you can just copy and paste the important content of your pitch or the LTE or op-ed into the email, do that. And this is an example of an op-ed pitch for you all too. Again, you'll have access to this too, so you can kind of use it as a template if you would like, but everything is copied and pasted. We were able to get this successfully published in Baltimore Sun. Very brief intro, and I ended, is this of interest? Following up is super important, and we're wrapping up here. I know we're getting close to time, and I want to make sure you all have time for questions too, but follow-up is probably, it's up there in terms of importance for getting your pitch to move forward, or your op-ed or LTE published. I know it sounds fast, but it's 24-hour follow-up. It almost always works for me. Just be super polite. Acknowledge that, you know, you're sure they're busy. You just wanted to see if this was of interest. And again, end with that question, because people are more likely to respond. For op-eds and LTEs, I would check in again at 48 hours if you haven't heard. And at 72 hours, I would call it and move on to another outlet and pitch that. If you get a yes, make sure you thank that person. Let them know you'll stand by for anything else they need. And yeah, just keep in touch to find out when that publication might be moving forward. And this is an example of a follow-up email that I sent to the Wall Street Journal to see if our piece was going to be published. I think we actually did get this published as well. I usually don't hear back until I follow up. That's how important these follow-ups are. And I don't want you all to forget our Exxon template, because I think that Christina and or Alexis circulated this already, but you all, as you know, we have a webinar coming up, and just a few months ago or a couple months ago, the Attorney General of California announced that he was suing ExxonMobil, and the petrochemical company that's responsible for a lot of our world's plastic pollution. And he was suing them for not just their plastic pollution in California state, but also the plastics recycling lies that they have spent decades telling the public. This is something that can be replicated in other states and should be replicated in other states. So we've created an LTE template that makes it really easy for you all to just plop in the relevant details, your own state, the Attorney General's name, and, there are places for where you can mention, for example, local bodies of water or areas that have been particularly affected by plastic pollution. And so this is super easy to submit. I think I even drafted a submission email for you all to include as well. So it's almost completely done for you. And I encourage you all to do this, particularly if you live in a state that has a Democratic Attorney General, as we're more likely to have success that route. And that is all I have. If you all have questions, I am more than happy to answer whatever I'm able to answer.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I definitely have a few questions, but I want to invite anyone to come off mute and just ask their question. Or I could get the conversation going too. So just a quick question on following up. Do you call or email usually?
That's a great question. For that first follow-up, I would do email. If you're still unsuccessful and you have a number, I would go ahead and call them if you still haven't heard back after that 24-hour follow-up. It's a little trickier now, post-COVID, to get phone numbers for reporters, as a lot of them work remotely now rather than in an office. But if that option is available to you, then by all means, use it.
And then I don't know about others, but when I've had LTEs published, the paper calls me to tell me that they're gonna publish it.
Yes, and if that happens, if you all successfully get an LTE or op-ed placed, or I should say when you successfully get an LTE or op-ed placed around plastic pollution or plastic policy or anything relevant here, please do let us know, because we want to amplify that on our own channels too as much as possible and share with our own relevant networks.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so basically we write our own articles. We don't use you don't have some, template that we use. We write our own, right?
For LTEs and op-eds,
Mm-hmm.
we have, sometimes if we're working on specific campaigns, like in New York, for example, we had a New York State letter to the editor template that people could use. You always have to customize it a little bit. But other than that, no. Although we do, if it's something that you all would benefit from, I am happy to send over like one of our overview fact sheets that I have that might just be helpful for plugging in with some relevant stats.
Okay. Yeah, and then also when I submit it to an outlet, you said like try to follow up, and if they don't respond after a few days or so, then send it to the next one. So you can't send it to multiple at the same time, then I assume?
Correct. So the papers it's really important to them that this is exclusive content to that outlet. So you always want to do one at a time, give them the opportunity. And if you have gone those 3 days and you've followed up and you haven't heard back and you've pivoted to a different paper, if that second paper says yes, it is good practice to go back to the first one and just send an email saying, I'd like to retract my submission. I've found another outlet that is interested in publishing. That way, if they were just really backed up and hadn't gotten to it yet, you've avoided any conflict there.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I'm
Mhm.
gonna try this. I've been really excited even before I heard
Yay.
about you guys, but to start writing just my local community papers. I live in New York also though, in Westchester County. And so if there's anything, any kind of programs that you guys have for New York stuff, I would be happy to promote that too.
That's great. Thank you so much. I imagine we will have an LTE template for New York again. So I'll make sure Alexis and Christina have that when the time is right.
Yeah, Lisa, we have a campaign coalition called New York is Not Disposable. So anyone here in New York who's not currently on that email list, please email me so that I can get you up to speed on what's going on in this state. I'll put my
Okay, great.
email chat. Maria, you have a question?
I was just curious, if hyperlinks would be appropriate for something that's purely print media, hard copy print media. It wouldn't be effective, or would it, or what?
It would, and that's because even though they're not going to be using those hyperlinks necessarily when they publish it, they're going to want to make sure that the facts that you're stating are backed up. And so it's purely, at the very least, there just so that they can confirm it is all true before they publish, because they're not going to want to publish anything that has even a hint of bias to it. So yeah, even if it's a print publication, make sure you have those hyperlinks. They've got fact checkers for everything.
Okay, thank you.
And again, the easier you can make it for them, the better.
Can you talk about why media is so important to grassroots campaigns and like how we generate news? Like sometimes it feels like we create news out of nothing to get in the paper. So why do we do that?
Yeah, media is so important for so many reasons. For one, education with the general public. There's just, I mean, as you all know, the plastic pollution issue is so multifaceted and complex. There's so many different types of impact, climate, environmental justice, marine trash, health. So getting that information out there so that the public is aware and can also, build momentum around the movement is great. It's also really important because it does put pressure, if it's strategic, on the people who have the power to make the decisions that change things on a big scale. So the policymakers, and they do listen to this stuff, especially if it's coming from a local resident that's in their district. So that's something to keep in mind too, if you're choosing an outlet, and you don't necessarily even have to be the author. If you're part of a group and you know that someone in that group resides in a district of one of the policymakers that really is in charge and able to make a change or pass a policy, you can even draft it for them and have them review and make sure they're comfortable with it, and they can submit it, because it's all about what is going to get heard and what that policymaker or decision maker is going to think is most important. They care about their constituents. They want to make sure that they're making them happy because they're the ones that keep them in office.
Christine, are you talking? I can't tell.
And yes, Laurie said, if you're trying to target a policy maker, be sure to name them. Be direct. That's definitely something we do in our work as well. We with New York last year, we were calling out, oh my gosh, it feels like years ago. Who were our main targets, Alexis, that we were constantly naming?
Hasty, the Assembly Speaker, the Senate Majority Leader. Those were the main two.
Because they had the power to bring it to the floor for a vote, and that's what we wanted.
Mm-hmm. When we're dealing with reporters like at Inside Climate News and, Mother Jones, they're pretty savvy with the issue, they get it, but I find that local reporters usually don't know anything about the nuances of plastic pollution, and why would they? Because they're just regular people and they're not super nerds on plastic like we are. But you mentioned that reporters want to appear unbiased, and so usually they'll quote the opposition in a paper, whether or not that makes them less biased or not. So can you just talk about, maybe use an example of how you strategize when it comes to framing an issue, knowing that the opposition is going to be quoted?
Totally. So it's kind of like a game of chess, a little bit. Policy is in general, and when we're using media to affect policy, it all falls into that chess game. You want to be thinking about, what is their move going to be? What are they going to try to say to discredit you? And make sure you include your counter argument to that in your piece, in your pitch, in your LTE, in your op-ed, so that you are always 2 steps ahead, and that the reporter has that to include in their story. Or, it's in your op-ed or LTE that's already written too, when you get the inevitable pushback.
Yeah, and papers will often print competing op-eds at the same time.
Yes, we've often a few times we've ended up submitting an LTE to a story that industry also submitted an LTE in. And so it came out with, I think we were actually on the top, which doesn't mean anything, but I still liked it, Beyond Plastics piece, and then the American Chemistry Council piece right below it. In terms of things the opposition might say to discredit you, I could go into a million specifics around that. But for example, we know that the industry, if we're talking about climate and plastics, the industry likes to point to a lot of self-industry funded studies that claim plastic is actually more eco-friendly and more sustainable than alternatives like glass, because it has a lower carbon footprint. That is not the full picture, because those studies, again, which are typically funded by industry, are not taking into consideration the full life cycle of plastics. But if we're submitting something around climate and plastics, we usually tend to include some kind of counter argument to that, because we know it's coming. So again, just think 2 steps ahead.
And that might be something we can help with as well if you're trying to frame a press release.
100%.
Kathy?
Yeah, 2 things. As far as social media platforms, I was wondering about Blue Sky. I think as many people as possible, and the more people who move over and start using it, it's the critical mass and the tipping point. I think that's important. Maybe keeping the Twitter accounts open maybe is okay, but because you never know, maybe things will change on there someday. But Blue Sky is really taking off, and so I'd like to encourage everyone to go over there and meet everybody. And then the other thing is, I have a question about is hyperlinks. So I've been noticing a lot of times when things get forwarded, the hyperlinks just get lost. The URLs, the underlying URLs just get lost. So what I've been encouraging people to do is do the hyperlinks, because but also include a citation list and with URLs below it. So if the hyperlinks get lost, the recipient, the reporter, doesn't have to go back to you and say, oh, I can't, I don't have these, or whoever they forwarded it to try to convince them that they should publish this or whatever, or go with it. So what do you, some feedback on that?
I think it's great to be better safe than sorry, right? You can't have too many sources is my way of looking at it. If you're worried about that, I would go ahead and include a citation list as well as your hyperlinks.
And Blue Sky, do you have any sense of what's going on with that? But
it's been a huge, I mean, they have gained a huge amount of followers since Elon Musk took over X or Twitter. We have our own account there, which Alexis has helpfully dropped into the chat. So please do follow us if you have a presence on Blue Sky and haven't followed us yet. The only challenge I have found so far is that a lot of our targets, we were talking about targets earlier, so a lot of these policymakers and companies we want to target have not quite yet made the shift, but I am hopeful that that will happen because I think X is going to get messier and more toxic, unfortunately. And I think more people will be encouraged to switch over. Right
Yeah,
now,
from
we
all
haven't
over
dropped
there.
Twitter entirely because Judith does have a pretty substantial following there, which is beneficial. And reporters are still using it a lot, which helps in my work for sure.
What people have been recommending is put at the top of your Twitter. So another reason not to delete your Twitter account, put on your Twitter account. You know, if you want to, talk with me, go over to Blue Sky and give them the link. And I noticed a couple of the the progressive media account are doing that. Saying go see
That's
us
a great
here.
idea.
So and maybe Beyond Plastics can do that too, and encourage your those you link with to do that.
That's a great idea. Thank you, Kathleen. I know Kathy's had her hand up for a while. And Deborah. Anyone go Kathy and then Deborah? I don't know who was first. I'm sorry.
Oh, the only thing I have to say is I'm on Blue Sky right now and I can't find Beyond Plastics.
Oh,
So
no.
I don't know why.
Did you see the link too in the chat? Go ahead and click that.
I'll
so
go
you can
into
help
chat
us.
and see if I can find it. That's all.
Kathy, what do you got? I think it was Kathy,
I
right?
think Kathy asked her question.
Oh, okay. We're good.
I have one more question, if you wouldn't mind. Just how do you frame a hook? Like, what is a hook? What's a good way to get writers on the hook?
Yeah, so a hook is your timely connection. What's in the news? What's important right now? It is basically the when of your 5 W's. Why does this matter now? I think an example of a hook that I mentioned earlier was when those fires were going on, and that was everything everyone was talking about on the East Coast of the US because the smoke was so bad that people couldn't go out. So we used that as a hook or a timely piece of information that we knew people really cared about in that moment to talk about plastic and its climate connection. So just be really aware of what's in the news. What are you and your circle of friends outside of the plastic topic talking about, and find connections. It looks like we have a question from Eric too.
It's not there.
Yes, hello. I was just curious about exposing someone like Ron Johnson, my senator here from Wisconsin, who is a plastics manufacturer. Is there a way of writing an op-ed or a LTE or something like that in favor of exposing him, so to speak, or whatever?
I think that might actually be better served as a pitch for a reporter, or even to, if you think there might be a big story there, find an investigative reporter that has covered the plastics issue before and see if they can do some digging and find more on that, or, to make it an even bigger story. I would say that's a pitch rather than an LTE or an op-ed.
Because he's a multimillionaire and he's made all his money from plastics. So
yeah, I think you've got a pitch right there.
Okay. So try to find a reporter from a newspaper or something in the area that would like to expose that sort of thing.
Yeah, a paper in their state, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Email us if you want help with that, Eric.
Okay, all right.
All right. Well, it's 8 o'clock. I know we've all had a long year, and everyone probably wants to take a nap until January 1st. So thank you for coming to our last meeting, and thank you so much, Melissa, for a wonderful presentation always wonderful to work with you.
Thank you all for listening to me.
You did awesome. We will see you
I-
all for our January policy retreat. This will be another special meeting on Wednesday, January 8th at 7 p.m. Also, I'm going to email you the RSVP form for the one-day conference on April 26th, 2025. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your year, as Melissa said.
What day of the week is that conference?
It'll be on a Saturday, I believe.
Okay.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, Saturday.
Thank you, Alexis.
Great. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.